Namaste. Thank you for joining me today. I am totally stoked to talk about today's subject. And the reason I'm stoked is because I love looking at modern science, especially neuroscience, cognitive science, modern psychology, from the lens of Ayurveda. It's so fascinating. So much of the modern science is actually based in Ayurveda and has its wisdom in Ayurveda, and we're just renaming it. Even medical science, psychoneuroendocrine immunological system, that's prana, tejas, and ojas, that's sattva, rajas, and tamas. The modern version of integrative medicine and biocircadian medicine, all of this has its foundation in Ayurveda. Today, we're talking about attachment styles and the Ayurvedic view of attachment styles. And what I want to do is weave the ancient wisdom of Ayurveda psychology and the dosha types to the modern understanding of these attachment styles and look at how these attachment patterns shape our emotional and physiological health. These aren't just new things. This was happening 5,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago. We've been here 300,000 years, the humans, and I'm pretty sure that attachment styles have been there the whole time. And we're going to look at where these different attachment styles intersect with the doshas and when the doshas are in balance and out of balance, because it's profound how these work and what Ayurvedic practices can be used to heal our insecure attachment and cultivate secure bonds in our life. And hopefully my goal is to create a holistic roadmap that we can use to transform our relational wounds into pathways for self-love, embodied love, where we're the embodiment of love. Human beings, we're wired for a connection. Look what happened with the pandemic when we weren't able to touch each other, connect with each other. It created so much psychological trauma, so many psychological wounds that I think we're going to be working on healing for a long time. From our very first breath, humans need or seek attunement. We need our caregiver's eyes. We need our mother's chest, our mother's breast. We need that reassuring touch. We need the rhythm of our mother and father's heartbeat. We need to lay our head, our heart against our caregiver's heartbeat. The attachment theory was developed by the psychologist John Bowlby, and it's basically the description of our primordial longings, and that he proposed the quality of the early bonds become an internal working model that guides every future relationship we have, whether it's with ourselves, with our partner, with our children, with our family, with our coworkers, with our friends, all of this. And just like this working theory of attachment theory, Ayurveda has a very similar experience. It has the same understanding where the subtle fabric of the body-mind connection through the tridosha, Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, and the mental gunas, the qualities of the mind, sattva, rajas, and tamas. This attachment theory is woven into that. What we're going to do is see what happens when we take John Bowlby's 4 attachment styles and look at them under the illuminating lens of the 3 doshas. Intriguing parallels emerge. It's amazing. Vata's volatility echoes the ancient hypervigilance of the attachment styles. Pitta's fierce autonomy mirrors avoidant distance attachment styles. Kapha's clinging, their need for clinging, the clinging comfort resembles fearful ambivalence. Each dosha, when they're balanced, just as easily or just as readily nourish the hallmarks, the pinnacle of what a secure attachment looks like: creativity, flexibility, clarity, courage, steadiness, and devotion. We're going to deep dive into all of this. So the first thing we need to ask and understand is, what are the attachment styles? Pretty good question to ask. Attachment styles are behavioral patterns or adaptations that influence how individuals relate to others in close relationship. It's also how we relate to ourselves, but this is mainly referring to how we relate to someone, something outside of ourselves. And these attachment styles are developed during infancy or childhood. And likewise, our traumas are the first basically, most of traumas are based on the first 7 years of life. And the way that these are developed is based on our caregiver's responsiveness to us. Because in the caregiver-child bond, our nervous system calibrates to the caregiver's responsiveness. And if we're not well adapted or well adjusted, these patterns develop into unhealthy adaptations, survival mechanisms, or traumas, and these persist in adulthood. Attachment styles really describe the habitual ways that we seek closeness. And that's not just to ourselves, that's to nature as well. It also describes how we handle conflict and how we then regulate trauma or distress or challenges within our intimate relationships. So ultimately, what attachment patterns do is shape our stress response, they shape our emotional regulation, and they shape our interpersonal dynamics. And the impact of insecure attachment styles plays a pivotal role on our physical health, our mental health, our emotional health, and ultimately our spiritual understanding of who we are. And when we have insecure attachment, it leads to chronic stress, which contributes to imbalances in the body and ultimately leads to the dis-ease and disorder of the human body and consciousness. So this modern research has basically determined 4 primary attachment styles. The first one is a secure attachment style, and the mantra for this would be, I am safe, I am worthy of love. And this is ultimately characterized by a sense of trust and confidence in ourselves and in our relationships. And when someone has a secure attachment style, that person feels comfortable with intimacy, they have a good sense of autonomy, and it's a result of the caregivers consistently responding to the child's needs with empathy, with care, with warmth, and with emotional attunement. And when we have that as a child, our intimacy, our ability to have closeness and autonomy, our ability to trust and communicate openly about our true feelings is profound. It's the source of a healthy emotional human being, emotional intelligence. And the person who has this very strong, secure attachment feels secure independently, doesn't need a relationship to feel secure, totally okay on their own, but enjoys deep, profound connections. So what this looks like when we grow up, when we become adults, is that we have healthy boundaries because we're established with an emotional, stable understanding of who we are, and we have great self-esteem. And we've developed effective conflict resolution. So if there's challenges in the relationship, if there's challenges at work, if there's challenges with our friendship, we know how to resolve that conflict with intelligence, with emotional attunement to ourselves and to the other person. Basically, it creates a strong relationship skill. It's an inherent strong relationship skill. And ultimately, when we grew up in tribes, when we were connected to the whole village, you know, the saying, it takes a village to raise a child. When we had that built strong relationship skills. We just absorbed that as part of our life. And basically, when we have that embodied presence, we're connected to ourself and we have good health, good vitality, we glow. We have a strong connection to the breath, to life source. There's a glow in people's eyes who have this. And the securely attached individual essentially not only, but most often experiences stable, supportive relationships. Because if there was a relationship that wasn't that, and the other person was not able to meet that person in that truth, in that honoring of spirit, then that relationship is naturally going to dissolve. So really, secure attachment is what everyone is striving for. That is the state of balance. And it's going to be profound when we look at that from the dosha model. The next of the attachment style is what's called anxious, preoccupied attachment. And the mantra for this attachment style is love can disappear at any moment. Why would someone think that? That's a painful operating system. It's because our caregivers weren't consistent. Sometimes there was nurturing, and sometimes there was responsiveness, and other times there was complete neglect or unpredictability. In unpredictability, not knowing if we're going to be cared for or not, we're constantly in a state of fight or flight, that sympathetic alertness. And what happens when we were raised in this ancient preoccupied attachment style is we do have a strong need for closeness, but we also have an insecurity that needs approval. And it's basically we develop a fear of abandonment, or if not abandonment, a heightened emotional sensitivity that is craving reassurance. It's basically a hyper-attuned state. It's actually hyper-attunement to threat. Again, that fight or flight state. What they need is closeness and intimacy, but the problem or the challenge becomes there's a constant fear of abandonment or rejection, so they're not feeling safe. That's the fundamental thing. We all need to feel safe. And there's quite often the experience or the internal, it's an anxiety. Basically, people have anxiety around relationships, and they need that constant reassurance that everything is okay, that they're loved, that they're cared for. And this creates a hypersensitivity to the partner's moods, or an overly dependent need for the partner to be happy, because we think if the parents were happy as a child, they would be there for us all the time. And so we actually become the parent. A child should never become the parent. And so there's a dependent on approval. And what that can translate to when we become adults is a clinginess, a neediness, even a jealousy. If your partner goes and talks to someone of the opposite sex or even the same sex, there's a jealousy, there's a fear of being abandoned. And then there's a struggle with self-worth, because as a child, if we're crying and mom and dad don't come to us, or if mom and dad are fighting, the first couple years of life, our pineal glands are open. We're actually completely connected to God. We don't even have an understanding that something is separate from self. There's a oneness. We're born connected to the universe. We're born connected to that divinity of oneness. Our pineal glands open. Basically, we're tripping. We're born tripping. And in that hallucinatory state on psychedelics, we experience the oneness of creation. And so if mom and dad or our caregivers are not happy, they're yelling, they're fighting, we think it's about us. There's a study done where someone is waving at a newborn, an infant, and once they learn motor skills and learn how to wave with their hands, they actually turn their hand towards themselves and wave at themselves. They think it's a mirror waving. Everything is mirroring ourselves. And we get programmed out of that. We go into ego training, so to speak. So we struggle with our self-worth. And basically, in this ancient preoccupied attachment style, we're always trying to get our self-worth from someone else. And we often struggle with personal boundaries. So the anxiously attached individual really can benefit from emotional self-regulation and building secure relationships with safe, consistent, and reliable partners. The next attachment style is what's called avoidant and dismissive. Avoidant dismissive attachment style. And the mantra here is, I can only rely on myself. Oh man, that is a lonely place to be. That is a sad place to be. Why would this happen? A child is only supposed to rely on its caregiver. So what would elicit this feeling and this survival mechanism is that the caregiver was always, or at least very often, more often than not, emotionally distant. The caregiver was unavailable. The caregiver was unresponsible. And this led to that child suppressing their emotions and relying on self-soothing. Modern psychology is insane. They're telling parents, if their baby is crying, let them cry it out. How messed up is that? If your friend is crying as an adult, as a teenager, we go immediately, what's going on now? How may I help you? How may I serve you? But parents are taught to leave their child to cry. That is insane, out of sanity, not incoherence. And this is what happens. The child thinks they're not worthy of love. That creates psychotic mental patterns as we grow up. The characteristic developed from this avoidant dismissive attachment style adaptation is we end up developing independence. But it's not a healthy independence. And then we become independent because we feel that's the only way to survive in nature. When a cell becomes independent in the human body, that's what creates cancer. It no longer thinks in harmony with the rest of the universe, with the rest of the body. And this avoidant dismissive attachment style is very uncomfortable with closeness and often are emotionally distant or emotionally withdrawn and really, sadly, minimize the importance of relationships. They prioritize the self-reliance and avoid anything that leads to vulnerability because it's not safe. It's understandable. It's an adaptation. It's a survival adaptation. But our nervous system rewires into being permanently or temporarily permanently, anything can be changed, in a sympathetic fight, freeze, or flight state. So as an adult, if we grow up with this attachment style, we develop a strong aversion or a real difficulty in expressing our emotions or showing affection to another person, and often become withdrawn or shut down emotionally, especially during conflict or stress. And basically grow up not trusting others, or at least not trusting others deeply. And the scenario is that we become emotionally distant and we downregulate these emotions. What a sad life to not be able to have vulnerability, to not be able to have intimacy, to not be able to speak how you truly feel with another person. So what this avoidant style can really benefit from is finding someone who can provide that safety where they feel an openness to express their emotions, where they feel an openness to be vulnerable, and gradually, over time, build that trust. And the final of the attachment styles is what's called fearful avoidant. And their mantra is, I want closeness, but closeness hurts too much. And this predominantly is a result of childhood trauma. It's a result of neglect or even abuse. The caregiver occasionally was a source of comfort, but mostly a source of fear. And so what this fearful avoidant attachment style is, basically it's a mix of anxious and avoidant tendencies. And there is a desire for closeness. There is a desire to be held and to be loved and to be nurtured because that was never there. And there's a profound fear around that. There's a profound fear of intimacy because of those past traumas. And what ends up happening in the psyche is that there's a conflict, or it cycles. The psyche cycles between pursuit of that and complete withdrawal of that. And if there's someone that they're in a relationship with, it creates great confusion in the other person unless that person is securely attuned and attached and understands what's happening. That fearful avoidant style is completely conflicted about intimacy. And at the same time they're craving that closeness, the fear of vulnerability and rejection is often too much. And they experience on a frequent basis emotional confusion, and that really leads to a lot of chronic stress and, for the most part, a real difficulty in self-regulation. With that difficulty in self-regulation, that's when real addictive patterns develop. That's when the chronic stress leads to chronic illness, because stress is basically the underlying factor in all dis-ease. So when we grow up, if we have this, there's a profound struggle between emotional regulation and maintaining relationships. And even though they may find someone who is deeply connected and deeply present and desires their well-being and is there for them, even with trust and safety, they may push that person away. And the pattern of relationship in this fearful avoidant type is basically unpredictable and turbulent. 1 minute they could be saying, I love you for life and marry you, and the next minute run away and not talk to you for months. So in this type of fearful avoidant attachment style, what's maybe required is deeper therapeutic support to heal that trauma, compassionate inquiry. That's my favorite method of dealing with fear and trauma. I've studied with Gabor Mate so much grace there. I think it's the most comprehensive way of dealing with our trauma. Learning emotional regulation skills and slowly over time with safety, fostering healthy attachment styles. So all of these things have a profound implication on our emotional well-being because insecure attachment chronically activates the fight, freeze, or flight state, that sympathetic hormone state, the stress axis. And what ends up happening biologically is we have elevated cortisol, the predominant stress hormone, and it triggers those inflammatory cytokines, which eventually lead to autoimmune diseases and cancer and disrupts the gut microbiome, the gut-brain axis, the lymphatic system, gut, lymph, and brain. And quite frequently, it creates erratic heart rate variability. When we do blood tests and all these EKGs and things, that's a major thing they look at, because when the heart is not regulated, the prana is not regulated, life force in our body, in our consciousness is not regulated. Any one of these things, the elevated cortisol, inflammatory cytokines, erratic heart rate variability, each one of these alone, or even worse when they're together, erodes and decays our immunity, our digestion, our sleep. And in Ayurveda, these are the three most important things that we look at: is our immune system, the ojas, the digestion, the agni, the sleep, the rejuvenative pathways of psychoneuroendocrine immunological systems, prana, tejas, ojas, sattva, rajas, tamas, the gunas, the qualities of our mind in our life. And so when we are working with a patient, we actually look at the dosha disturbance based on these things, amongst other things. When we are securely attached, though, conversely, when we're securely attached, it bolsters our parasympathetic nervous system. It promotes that sattvic clarity. It supports our ojas, our subtle immunity that protects the body and the mind and gives us longevity. That's our deposit into our 401k of health and vitality and longevity. And the good thing, just like the doshas, so we have a dosha, a deha dosha prakruti. That's what we're born with. That's the constitution we're born with. But the 5 elements, the 3 doshas, they're always changing. The only constant is change, right? We've all heard this. The 5 elements are constantly dancing, changing per season, per time of the day, every 2 hours, based on what we think, based on what we eat. Likewise, our attachment styles, they are stable, but they're not set in stone. With awareness, with therapeutic work, with conscious effort, just like the doshas, it's completely possible and necessary to shift towards a more secure attachment style. Sometimes this happens quickly and sometimes it takes time. So both in modern psychotherapy, psychology, and Vedic psychology and Ayurveda, there's practices that really help. And it's not limited to these, but they really help. So psychotherapy, especially trauma-informed psychotherapy, somatic therapy, internal family systems, family constellations. Again, my favorite, compassionate inquiry. Doing mindfulness practices, mindful meditation, breath work, pranayama. Doing healthy relationship modeling and having consistent emotional support. And doing communication skill training, boundary setting, emotional intelligence development, learning nonviolent communication, learning atma-vicharya or self-inquiry practices. But we have to understand our attachment style first. And when we do that, it not only improves our self-awareness, it significantly can enhance the quality of our relationships and emotional well-being. Let's switch focus now to the Ayurvedic view of this. And let's begin with the Ayurveda view of emotional health and the 3 doshas and our emotional balance. I think that's a really good place to start. Just briefly, I want to go over the 3 doshas. For those who happen to be tuning in for the first time, welcome. I do recommend you go back and listen to initial episodes and have some foundation of what we're talking about here. But just real quickly, the 3 doshas, the 3 bodily humors or constitutions, Vata is made up of air and ether. And this governs our movement, our creativity, our communication. When it's in balance, it leads to anxiety and fear. Pitta is the fire element, and it governs our transformation, our ambition, our digestion, and our inspiration, or I would say intensity. Intensity is not good or bad, but when it's out of balance, it leads to impatience, frustration, and anger, and even rage. And then Kapha, the third of the three doshas, is made up of water and earth. There's only 5 elements in creation: space, the container, air, fire, water, earth. So each of the doshas is based on some of these things. And everyone is a combination of all of them. Kapha is water and earth. Water and earth is stable. It governs our stability, our grounding, our nurturing, and our endurance. Slow and steady wins the race. That's Kapha. When it's out of balance, it leads to stagnation. It leads to inertia, into lethargy and attachment, like really severe attachment, including hoarding. That's a Kapha imbalance. Ayurveda also gives a unique perspective on the mind that modern science is also really honoring. It's what's called the manasa gunas, the qualities of the mind, and it's sattva, rajas, and tamas. These are the mental states, and they have a dramatic influence or a profound influence on our different attachment styles. And emotional imbalances can manifest in our doshas, in the physical body. If you've listened to this podcast before, I've mentioned it many times. Both Bruce Lipton and Candace Perth, they're medical doctors who wrote about this. Bruce Lipton in The Biology of Belief, and Candace Perth in The Molecules of Emotion. From medical science, modern medical scientific method have proven that what we think and what we feel dramatically, instantly impacts our cells and the body's health and how a cell thinks and functions. So emotional imbalances manifest as dosha imbalances. The role of our own self-awareness, of emotional regulation in fostering secure attachment is essential. We have to understand that. And when we understand the 3 doshas and we understand the 3 mental qualities, sattva, rajas, and tamas, the pure state, the active state, and inertia state within ourselves, we can really develop a profound state of self-awareness. Only through self-awareness can we have emotional regulation and emotional intelligence. Let's look at how each dosha manifests in the attachment styles. This is fascinating. When I first had this idea in my head to look at it this way, I thought, is there a correlation here? There has to be. All these modern systems have to have a correlation to Ayurveda. And when I put it together, wow, I like had a mindgasm. My mind just blew up. I have a Virgo mind. I love studying. I would call myself an Ayurvedic geek or a knowledge geek for the most part. I feel like I'm a perpetual student. I'm a way better student than a teacher. And I don't feel like I'm teaching anything. I'm just sharing the few things that I've learned, right? So let's explore this, really, because I find this fascinating. I really hope you do too, because each dosha influences our behavior, our emotional patterns, and our relationship dynamics within these unique attachment styles. So what I'm going to do here is look at each attachment style and how each dosha plays into that. So remember, the secure attachment style, number 1, is characterized naturally by trust, by emotional resilience, and healthy intimacy. And in this state, our doshas are actually pretty well balanced. And however, whatever our dominant dosha is, pretty much shapes how our security is expressed. So the first, Vata dosha, in the secure attachment style, the positive traits of the Vata dosha with a secure attachment is the Vata is filled with creativity and adaptability. They shine, and they really shine in secure relationships. These Vata types bring excitement and openness and a willingness to explore anything and grow together. That's really, like, this positive trait is so good for really developing a spiritual relationship with someone. And they're very well emotionally regulated. When Vata is balanced, they can communicate so well. They have Vak Siddhi, the power of speech, of air, of prana. They're filled with empathy and supportive in relationships. And more than anything, they can foster deep emotional connections, and they can help someone feel truly safe. So other attachment styles can really heal in their presence. And again, with this type of relationship dynamic, they thrive in relationships, and especially relationships that are encouraging of freedom and individuality. What that does is creates a space for mutual trust. What more could you ask for in a relationship? That's, I think, what everyone is seeking in a relationship. When a Pitta is securely attached, the positive trait of a Pitta is they're filled with passion. They're filled with inspiration. They're filled with determination to contribute. And they're filled with a sense of purpose. And, like, same with Vata, mutual respect in that relationship. And a Pitta is so dependable and protective of their loved ones, they will defend you till the end of time. They're the warriors who are going to defend the tribe. They're the mother lioness who, if anyone comes to attack the cubs, they're going to be out there on the front lines fighting for their loved ones. They're completely dependable. That's who you want by your side in the trenches. Pittas, when they're emotionally regulated, navigate conflicts completely constructively. They see the vision, the sight, the fire of sight. They see what's needed to bring clarity into the situation, but they can do it with a calmness, and they can do it with a profound sense of leadership. And in a relationship, they really value honesty, and they expect that level of honesty and integrity from the person they're in a relationship with, because they're there to give it 100%, 108%. And they also value personal growth. They're working on themselves. As Ram Dass says, I work on myself as service to others, and I serve others as work on myself. They expect that to an extent of their partner. And they encourage themselves always. And they encourage their partner and the people they work with, whether it's on the farm or in the office. They encourage their partners, their coworkers, to strive to be their very best. Not for themselves, but they want you to be your very best. And a Kapha, wow, Kapha is the essence of compassion. They're the essence of stability and nurturing. It's that warm, motherly love that we all wish we had. And they are the ones capable of creating that safe and supportive environment. They are the most loyal and the most reliable. If you yell at your dog before you leave the house and go to work, that dog is so loyal. You walk home and it's still just as excited to see you as the first day you brought it home. It doesn't remember. It forgot that you yelled at it. It just loves you unconditionally. When the Kapha is balanced, when they're emotionally regulated, they manage their own emotions, and they can help their partners and their coworkers manage their emotions. And they're filled with infinite patience and steadiness. They offer this calm presence that Pitta and Vata may or may not be able to offer. And what they can do in the context of a relationship is build these deep emotional bonds that will last a lifetime. They create these long-lasting, meaningful, lifelong friendships and relationships. And even if you forget about that Kapha, securely attached person, you call them 20 years later, they're going to remember you and be there for you. When we look at the anxious and preoccupied attachment style, it's a very different story, because remember, they're seeking constant reassurance because of their abandonment fear. And this style often arises predominantly from Vata imbalances. Now, it definitely manifests in Pitta and Kapha, but it's quite different than the Vata style. So when a Vata is anxious or anxious preoccupied, the manifestation for the Vata is instability, and it creates this overactivity in the mind that they're constantly worried about the past. They're focused on what could happen in the future. It amplifies the fear and abandonment. They remember being abandoned in the past, and they live from this fear state that they're going to be abandoned again in the future. And they're constantly, excessively, habitually worried about their partner's feelings, or if the partner's committed to them. And what that does to their emotions is creates frequent mood swings and real difficulty in calming the thoughts. And it's hard to be in the heart when you're in the mind. It's often said the longest journey a human can take is from the head to the heart. It's completely true, because in this anxious, preoccupied attachment style, there's a constant over-analysis of the relationship. And so it's hard to be in love when you're in the mind. And what that does is creates clinginess, it creates neediness, and it creates an overdependence on their partner for their own emotional security. There's no way to be healthy. That's codependency. That's not a healthy way of existence. What Ayurveda would recommend for this type is grounding routines, calming practices, nourishing foods that stabilize the emotion and reduce fear. I would say go out on the earth and lay on the earth, hug a tree for 20 minutes. When the Pitta has this ancient preoccupied attachment, that's really intense. The Pitta's intensity really exacerbates the feeling of frustration or anger when the need for reassurance is unmet. And in that state of having an unmet need, whatever it is, they try to become controlling, or at least if they're not controlling, they're overcritical of their partner. They're blaming their partner for their unmet needs, for their inability to self-regulate. And what that does emotionally is creates this vacillation, an oscillation between passionate involvement and a constant state of irritability. That's a roller coaster, and you don't know. If you actually pay to go on a roller coaster, you know when it's going up, you know when it's going down. In this emotional pattern, you don't know if it's going up or down. It's the person who's in the relationship with this anxious, preoccupied Pitta doesn't know what they're going to be from one moment to the other. It's a very unsafe scenario for the other person. And a lot of times what it's going to end up doing is create behavior patterns that are really competitive. And the competitiveness is in the need for validation. Or if there's jealousy or possessiveness, they're going to compete against some unknown or imagined competitor that may or may not exist. They're competing against themselves, essentially. Ayurveda offers the Pitta cooling practices, meditation, cooling breath, calming diets, anything that can temper that emotional intensity and really allow them to feel safe enough to create patience. When we look at the Kapha's anxious, preoccupied attachment style, it's a whole nother story because it leads to deep emotional dependence and really a difficulty in letting go, especially in unhealthy relationships. They'll stay in abusive, unhealthy relationships much longer than they should. No one should stay in abusive, unhealthy relationships because they're in a constant fear of loss. And when they have loss, the kapha goes into a prolonged sadness or despair or even a depression when they have the feeling of being neglected. And so even unhealthy attention, abusive attention is attention. It's better than neglect for that kapha type, for the anxious, preoccupied kapha type. And that leads to behavior traits that are quite often self-sacrificing, excessive self-sacrifice, really, being a doormat for them to walk, for the other person, the abuser, to walk over. And in that, there's a reluctance to assert personal needs that ultimately will eventually lead to resentment. When you're not addressing your own needs in sake of someone else, resentment eventually comes. What a kapha needs in this scenario is stimulating activities, light activities, going outside in the daylight hours, and energizing foods, light, spicy foods, ginger, chili peppers, and friends who are willing to hold them accountable and help them build emotional independence. The third attachment style is the avoidant dismissive. In this, remember, the avoidant dismissive style is going to prioritize independence more than anything. They depend on themselves for safety and security. In that, there's quite often, not always, but quite frequently, that's where the emotions get suppressed because it's not safe and it's not productive. It's not going to help them thrive in life. When a Vata is in this state, the Vata becomes spaced out, flighty, and that basically can contribute to, one is emotional distancing. They feel like they have to separate themselves, and if they say they're going to meet you at 2:00, they may not show up till 6:00 or may call you the next day telling you that they forgot. It's just a way of keeping themselves safe. And due to that or due to other scenarios, it creates a difficulty in maintaining these stable relationships because any healthy person isn't going to allow that to happen very often or for too long. When the Vata avoidant dismissive style is in their deep emotional patterns, there's really an avoidance for intimacy because they're truly in fear of vulnerability. And there's inconsistency in their ability to express emotion. Oftentimes, they don't even know how they feel. Literally, one moment they feel this, the next moment they feel the opposite. And when that happens, the tendency is to withdraw. Because it's not nice to feel overwhelmed, regardless of your constitution. And it's also really tiring to be over-intellectualizing your emotions. And so they just withdraw. Very simple. What this Vata type needs is grounding practices, warm abhyanga, warm oil massage, warm baths with calming, nurturing food, a nice stewed apple with cinnamon and some coconut sugar and some clove and nutmeg, right? The Vata needs to feel safe. So these things can really help. When a Pitta is in their avoidant dismissive style. The Pitta, basically, they strive for control in any situation, and they depend on their own self-reliance. But what that does is leads to deep emotional detachment and a very strong avoidance or reluctance to depend on someone else. Even if they remotely feel safe, they'll still avoid truly depending on another person. And what that does to their emotions is basically creates an adaptation where the emotions are suppressed. They're constantly in a state of defensiveness. And when intimacy gets really close and feels overwhelming, they become frustrated with themselves, I think, mostly, and become completely defensive of their emotions, especially when someone is present with them and allowing them to feel their emotions. They become defensive, they become distant, they run away from it. So a Pitta needs to foster emotional openness. They need a container to feel safe. And really, a really good practice for Pittas is reflective practices, self-inquiry. And I actually like the 4-step process of self-inquiry. With a thought, with any thought we have, we can ask, is it true? Can I know that it's absolutely true? Who would I be? Whether we believe it's true or not, who would I be without that thought? Or if I didn't believe that thought? And is there any healthy, conscious, life-affirming reason to keep holding on to that thought? And then cooling practices, because Pitta overheats. So any of the cooling Ayurvedic practices. When a Kapha is in their avoidant dismissive style, they resist change because it's too painful. And what ends up happening is they emotionally withdraw, and they'll do anything to avoid confrontation or going into emotional depth. It's just too painful. It's easier for them to suppress those feelings. And they go into what's called passive resistance, especially with intimacy or any kind of profound emotional connection. And those suppressed, depressed, repressed emotions lead to deep physical, emotional, and psychological imbalances later on. Basically, it's shutdown. That's the freeze state. They completely check out emotionally and go into isolation. They can't deal with the stress. Kapha needs accountability friends. They need stimulating activities. They need invigorating exercise, invigorating diets, invigorating breath practices. And they need someone to help them engage in relationships. They need a friend to come over at 5 o'clock in the morning, drag them out of the bed, and take them on a hike in the sunshine at the sunrise. The final of the attachment styles is the fearful avoidant style. And remember that this is a combination of both anxious and avoidant styles. And the typical pattern is they crave the closeness, but tremble with intimacy. And this is from essentially unresolved trauma that probably happened the first 7 years of life. And so all 3 doshas can easily manifest this attachment style, and it's quite often fluctuating. The Vata's fear and unpredictability heightens their internal conflict. And the internal conflict is between seeking that closeness and fearing rejection, so they just never even try. And what happens emotionally for this Vata type, for the fearful avoidant Vata type, is rapid, constantly changing shifts between seeking connection and withdrawal. That I can't actually imagine myself what that's like, to be in that constant state of flux. I've been there a few times in my life. It's horrible. It feels so bad on a physical level, emotional, mental, and spiritual level. It's so confusing, and it's such a dramatic change. It's so erratic. And what that ultimately does is leads us to indecisiveness. It's an indecisiveness that's basically leaves us in analysis paralysis. We cannot figure out what to do with anything. And we have that constitution, that fearful avoidant Vata, has difficulty trusting others, even more so difficulty trusting themselves. They don't trust themselves enough to know when to trust someone else. And so all the Ayurvedic tools for grounding Vata are going to basically help stabilize Vata's energy and cultivate a sense of safety. When a Pitta is in the fearful avoidant state, this leads to intensity, a lot of internal intensity, conflict of emotion between passion and anger. And they really have a difficulty reconciling the desire for control with fear of vulnerability. And that oscillation between emotional outbursts and cold detachment leads to chaos in the Pitta as well. And often the result is rage. Same thing. Pitta needs to cool down. It needs mindfulness techniques to balance those emotional extremes. It's like a fire. A fire can be used to cook the food and warm us on a cold night, and it can burn down the whole forest. So Pitta needs to really regulate that fire, have control of the thermostat. Then Kapha, the Kapha fearful avoidant attachment tendency is to create this push-pull dynamics of both creating emotional security and, again, trembling fear of intimacy. And there's this deep reluctance to confront those fears, which leads to internalized emotion and suppressed desires. And what that leads to is either a procrastination or avoidance of emotional discussion to heal the emotional wounds of the past. It's the hardest for them to really go into the pain, to clear it out. And so, again, the Kaphas need those stimulating therapies. They need self-reflective practices, compassionate inquiry to help release those emotional bondages and hopefully, with enough safety and time, promote trust. So Ayurveda is so profound because it offers unique ways of management and treatment of the doshas, and hence that influences our emotional patterns and relational behaviors. So if we want to have self-understanding, we need to understand these connections. And when we understand it, there's a pathway to healing. So again, Vata needs grounding and consistency to address that anxious and erratic tendency. Pitta needs cooling, softening practices to reduce the intensity and the need for control. And Kapha needs or thrives from stimulation or energizing practices that will counteract that stagnation and detachment. And how Ayurveda treats insecure attachment, regardless of the attachment style. Dietary adjustments. Number one, food is medicine. Food is nurturing and love from Mother Earth. And ultimately, with 8 billion people on the planet, each person's diet is unique. The role of Ayurveda is to tailor the diet to the individual, both supporting physical, emotional, and mental health. So ultimately, we do want to have sattvic foods. Vata needs warm, grounding foods, warm soups, curries, stews. Pitta needs cooling, hydrating foods like cucumber, celery, melons like this. And Kapha needs light, warming, spicy foods to stimulate the metabolism. The dinacharya, those daily routines, that establishes our stability. Every constitution, physical, mental constitution, every human on the planet, we have a biocircadian cycle that's in tune with Mother Nature and the universe. So we want to attune to that. Vata needs regularity in sleep, food, and self-care more than anyone else. We all need that, but Vata the most. Pitta needs to take regular scheduled breaks so they don't burn out and they can reduce the intensity and the drive and the striving for the greatest amount of success. And then Kapha needs those dynamic stimulating activities. One of the most potent things is touch. Now, we can do touch in so many different ways, but Ayurveda does like to identify how each person should be touched, ideally with some kind of massage. That's first and foremost. So Vata needs warm oil massages with sesame oil. It could be almond oil too, but it needs to be warm oil, and grounding aromatherapy like sandalwood, like Palo Santo, like Jatamansi, vetiver, lavender, sweet things, sweet night blooming jasmine or lotus flower or rose to open the heart. Pitta needs cooling massage oil like coconut oil. Sandalwood also can be a little cooling, so sandalwood, lotus flower for the Pitta constitution. Anything sweet is also good for Pitta, so jasmine like this. One of the greatest practices in Ayurveda, my favorite treatment of all time, is Shirodhara. That's the pouring of warm oil over the forehead. It is the most calming, rejuvenating thing for a Pitta. Whenever I'm in India, I get as much Shirodhara as I can. And then Kapha needs vigorous massage to energize the body. Traditionally in Ayurveda, we'd use mustard seed oil because that's warming, heating, and lightening. Olive oil could work too, but Kapha does best with dry skin brushing, moving the lymph, or dry powders. These are things that Kapha does best with. Heavy, sticky oils don't help a Kapha. And then each constitution can do mindfulness or meditation practices as per their unique constitution. They should be tailored to the individual, so it's specifically calming that individual's mind at the same time promoting an emotional balance. And any of these practices, each of these mindfulness and meditation practices, really it changes our neurochemistry, our neurobiology, because they're stimulating the production of our happiness hormones. They raise our serotonin, dopamine, our oxytocin, the love bonding chemical. They strengthen our telomeres. These are the longevity strands at the end of our RNA, DNA. And they modulate our default mode network. So it reshapes our attachment circuitry. It reshapes and rewires. It fires and rewires and fires our neurochemistry. Vata wants grounding meditation, focused on the breath, body awareness, doing body scans, having weighted blankets, laying on Mother Earth, even digging a hole in the earth and sitting in the hole. Beautiful. Pitta needs mindfulness practices that release anger and cultivate compassion. Doing metta, that's loving kindness, sending loving kindness out to the world, towards oneself and then out to the world. Cooling practices. Pitta can meditate in a river, in a lake, under a waterfall. Amazing. And again, Kapha needs energizing meditations, visualization that inspire the pranic movement, filling the cells with light, filling the cells with the light of love and consciousness, doing fast rhythmic breathing, doing fire visualization, or even meditating on a candle flame or in front of a fire, and doing lots of mantra chanting, and even rhythmic mantra chanting, doing it, relatively quickly. Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, something like that. So this is a foundation of Ayurveda and the attachment styles. Like our dosha, attachment styles are not a life sentence. We're not bound to them. They're energetic grooves, like in a record, that have been carved by our early childhood experiences. And they continually shape and reshape by what choices we make and the environment we live in and the people we hang out with and our consciousness level. So Ayurveda offers us this massive amount of tools, this whole tool shed to understand the grooves in the record through the language of the dosha, of the guna. And then we can polish them into these beautiful gems that can reflect light like a polished diamond. And they can become these pathways of secure connection. So what I would recommend is that we begin with one simple practice. This is the best practice. For me, this has been a really profound practice, and I encourage you to do it. Place tonight or in the morning. If you're listening to this first thing in the morning, do this. If you're not driving, stop and do this. Place your hand on your heart and breathe down into your belly. Let the breath go into the belly. Inhale through the belly, exhale through the belly. And silently or out loud repeat, I am here. I am worthy of love. I am here. I am love. Putting your hand on your heart. I am here. I am worthy of love. I am here. I am love. And then wrap your arms around your shoulders and give yourself a big hug. You can do that mantra, I am here, I am worthy of love. I am here, I am love, with your hand on your heart for as long as you want. It can be 1 minute, it can be 10 minutes. And then hug yourself at the end of that. In that process, you're honoring that inner child. You're holding your own inner child that your parents may have forgotten to hold. My parents forgot to hold me. That's why this is so profound for me, because when I was 1 month old, my parents decided to go back to work and they put me in a nursery and they put me in a cage, a crib, in an understaffed, overfull nursery. So I wasn't held all day. So now I've learned to hold myself. This calms the dosha. I had so much anger. I had so much discontent, and I didn't even know why, because I was actually told that I was held. My parents lied to me because they did hold my brother. When my brother was born, they held him. My mom stopped working and she held him for 2.5 years. They told me the same story, but I knew in me, somewhere deep in my cells, I knew that wasn't true. There was always a lack of that motherly nurturing. So I've learned to hold myself. And in that, the anger has slowly disappeared. The inner child is feeling nurtured and whole. The Pitta in me is capable of now feeling vulnerable and sharing this with you, because I no longer identify with that unheld child. I identify with myself as love. I am here, I am worthy of love, and I am love. So in the moment we're able to do that, we honor that little child. We hold that little child. And that's the first step in developing healthy, rooted relationships that are rooted not just in freedom, not just in safety, but in joy and bliss, because that's the nature of who we are. The yogic texts, the Vedic texts, they all say the nature of human beings is Satchidananda, pure bliss consciousness. When we stop identifying with the trauma, with the pain, it doesn't mean we don't have pain. It doesn't mean we don't feel, but we stop identifying who we are as the pain, as the trauma. Yes, we all have had pain. I've never met someone who didn't have pain. I've never met someone who didn't have some kind of trauma. But we don't We're no longer willing to carry that as our identity anymore, so we can be free. As the mystic Bob Marley said, free yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our mind. No guru can do that for you. Yeah, they can show you how to do it, but you have to do it. No one can walk in your feet. You have to walk in your own feet. You have to love yourself completely. I pray that we can all love ourselves completely. I pray that this synthesis of modern psychology and ancient Ayurvedic wisdom can support us in the grand awakened living, in our awakened living process, where every heartbeat is an invitation for us to love ourselves more wisely, more fully, more completely. And then from there, we share that love with the world. From the depth of my heart, I thank you for joining me today. And I pray that there was something of value for you. And if there was, please share it. Please share it with anyone you think could use hearing this and hearing what Ayurveda can offer for these attachment styles and wounds. And as always, please leave your comments. Share what you've experienced. Share your wisdom. Share what you've learned. What has worked for you in life? What hasn't worked for you in life? When you share your experience, we can all learn and grow from that. What Ram Dass said, I work on myself as others. I work on myself as service to others, and I serve others as work on myself. When you share what you've experienced in life here in this community, in this forum, you're doing a service to all of us, me included, because I learned. I don't think I know everything. I don't even think I know that much. I mean, what can we know? The universe has been here 14.5 billion years. We've only been here 300,000 years. Our universe, we can see with a telescope 2.3 trillion, not million, not billion, 2.3 trillion galaxies. And NASA is now telling us we're only seeing 2% of the universe, 2 to 3% of the universe. That means 97% of the universe we don't know anything about. And what we do know about in this universe is very little. So whatever we have, whatever experiences we have, let's share that with openness, with love, with gratitude for those experiences, however difficult. If we can address those childhood wounds and traumas with love and empathy and compassion, we can heal ourselves and we can be a source of love and joy for each other. Until next week, walk in peace, walk in balance, fill your hearts with love and light, and share that with everyone you meet and express it in everything you do. Namaste.